What a 10. Her real name wasn't Marilyn Monroe. Before she became the world's most famous blonde, she was born as Norma Jeane Mortensen on June 1, 1926, in Los Angeles, California. Her early years were anything but glamorous. Her mother, Gladys, worked in a film cutting room, but she struggled with severe mental health issues, leaving Norma Jeane in and out of foster homes and orphanages. There was no stable father figure in her life, and the young girl grew up with a haunting sense of abandonment that never truly went away. It's important to understand this beginning, because it shaped the Marilyn Monroe the world would later come to know. Unlike many stars who were discovered through connections or privilege, Norma Jeane had nothing. No wealth, no Hollywood parents, no silver spoon. What she did have, though, was a resilience that would push her through some of the darkest corners of life. By the time she was 16, Norma Jeane married her neighbor, James Doherty, not out of love, but out of necessity. At that time, foster care rules meant she couldn't stay with a family past a certain age, and marriage was her only way out. James joined the Merchant Marines during World War II, and while he was overseas, Norma Jeane began working in a munitions factory. That's where a photographer spotted her and took pictures that would change her life. This factory photo shoot marked the first crack in the shell of Norma Jeane and the birth of Marilyn Monroe. Soon, she was modeling for magazines, and studios began to take notice. But Hollywood was all about reinvention, and Norma Jeane Mortensen didn't sound like a star. So she changed it. Marilyn came from actress Marilyn Miller, while Monroe was her mother's maiden name. Together, the two created a name that the world would never forget. But what's fascinating is that even as Marilyn Monroe took the world by storm, Norma Jeane never really disappeared. Throughout her life, friends and biographers often noticed this duality. There was Marilyn, the glamorous, confident, radiant star who could command a room. And then there was Norma Jeane, the fragile, insecure girl who never quite believed she was enough. The tension between those two selves became the heartbeat of her story. Think about it. How many American stars have lived double lives like that? On one hand, Marilyn was adored, photographed, and idolized. On the other, Norma Jeane was still that foster child who longed for stability and love. It's one of the reasons her story resonates even today, because it's about identity. Who are we really, beneath the roles we play for the world? Her name change wasn't just a Hollywood trick, it was survival. And from that point on, the world would never call her Norma Jeane again. Number 9. She was one of the first women to take control of her career in Hollywood. By the early 1950s, Marilyn Monroe was on her way to becoming a household name. She had roles in films like The Asphalt Jungle and All About Eve, and the camera adored her. But the industry saw her as one thing only, the dumb blonde. Studio executives wanted her to play light-hearted, comedic, and sexy roles. She was typecast, boxed in, and expected to smile while Hollywood pulled the strings. But Marilyn wasn't just a pretty face who did what she was told. Beneath the curves and platinum hair was a sharp, ambitious mind. She wanted more depth, more respect, more control over the image that the world consumed. And unlike many actresses of her time who stayed silent, she fought back. In 1954, Marilyn made one of the boldest moves any Hollywood star had ever attempted. Frustrated with the shallow roles Fox was giving her, she walked out on her contract with 20th Century Fox. That might not sound revolutionary today, but back then, actors were practically owned by studios. To defy a studio was to risk career suicide. But Marilyn wasn't afraid to gamble. She left Hollywood, moved to New York, and did something shocking. She enrolled in classes at the Actors Studio, studying under the legendary Lee Strasberg. This was the same school where Marlon Brando and James Dean trained. Marilyn Monroe, the blonde bombshell, wanted to be taken seriously as an actress. She wore no makeup to class, dressed plainly, and sat quietly among her peers, eager to learn. The press mocked her. Studio heads sneered, calling it a publicity stunt. But Marilyn pushed on, determined to prove that she was more than a sex symbol. And guess what? It worked. When she returned to Hollywood, she renegotiated her contract with Fox on her terms. Not only did she secure higher pay, but she also won the right to choose her directors and approve scripts, something nearly unheard of for actresses at the time. And then came the movies that would define her career. Bus Stop in 1956, where she played a vulnerable saloon singer, and The Prince and the Showgirl in 1957, where she starred alongside Laurence Olivier. These roles showed the world that Marilyn Monroe was as tea-just candy for the camera. She was an actress with range, depth, and serious talent. Her boldness paved the way for future generations of women in Hollywood. Today, we celebrate stars like Reese Witherspoon and Margot Robbie for creating their own production companies and demanding respect. But Marilyn was doing that in the 1950s when the system was stacked against women. She took on a male-dominated industry and bent it, even if only for a little while, to her will. Think about that for a second. A woman who grew up in foster homes, with no connections and no money, became one of the first actresses to wrestle power away from the Hollywood machine. She wasn't just breaking ceilings, she was rewriting the rule book. And that's what makes this fact so incredible. Marilyn Monroe wasn't just a victim of Hollywood, she was a fighter. She took control of her destiny at a time when women were told to sit down, smile, and be grateful. She refused to be silenced, and in doing so, she carved out a legacy that still inspires women in entertainment today. Thyroid. She struggled with mental health and addiction. Behind the glitz of red carpets, the flashbulbs of paparazzi, and the adoration of millions, Marilyn Monroe's life was marked by a battle she could never truly win: her mental health. To the outside world, she was untouchable, glowing, immortalized in still photographs and movie reels. But up close, her life was far less glamorous. Her childhood instability never left her. Remember, her mother struggled with schizophrenia, and Marilyn spent much of her youth in foster care. That kind of trauma doesn't vanish when you put on makeup and a designer gown. As she rose to fame, the pressure only intensified. Everyone wanted a piece of Marilyn: her producers, her directors, her fans, the tabloids. She was constantly on stage, even off camera. The weight of that expectation pushed her deeper into insecurities. She developed stage fright so severe that she often vomited before performing. She also became notorious for being late on set, sometimes hours late, not because she didn't care, but because her anxiety was so overwhelming that she couldn't bring herself to leave her dressing room. Co-stars like Tony Curtis and Clark Gable complained, but those who knew her personally understood. Marilyn was terrified of not being perfect, of letting people down. To cope, she turned to barbiturates and alcohol. Pills to help her sleep, pills to calm her nerves, pills to wake her up. Hollywood in the 1950s didn't talk about addiction the way we do now. Back then, doctors freely prescribed medications without much concern for long-term consequences. Marilyn became trapped in a cycle that blurred the line between treatment and dependency. And yet, she kept working. In movies like Some Like It Hot, her comedic timing was flawless, her charm magnetic. The audience never saw the struggle, only the performance. That is the paradox of Marilyn Monroe, the woman who could light up the screen while privately drowning in loneliness. One heartbreaking detail often overlooked is her yearning for motherhood. Marilyn desperately wanted children, but suffered multiple miscarriages. The combination of physical pain, emotional loss, and a sense of inadequacy deepened her depression. She confided to close friends that she feared she would never be able to give the world the one thing she longed for most: a family of her own. In many ways, Marilyn ate us story mirrors that of countless American women of the 20th century who battled silently with mental illness, trying to maintain appearances while their inner worlds crumbled. She embodied the perfect illusion of Hollywood glamour, but she was also a symbol of how fame cannot protect someone from the fragility of being human. Today, conversations about celebrity mental health, from Britney Spears to Selena Gomez, owe much to the painful lessons of stars like Marilyn Monroe. She showed us that vulnerability exists even in the brightest spotlight, and that sometimes the cost of stardom is far greater than the applause it brings. Chapter 7. Her marriage to Joe DiMaggio was a true American love story with a tragic ending. Few love stories have captivated Americans quite like the whirlwind romance of Marilyn Monroe and Joe DiMaggio. He was Joltin' Joe, the legendary New York Yankees center fielder, an all-American hero admired by millions. She was the rising Hollywood goddess, dazzling, unpredictable, and beloved by fans worldwide. Together, they were the ultimate power couple of the 1950s, the baseball legend and the movie star. Their romance began in 1952 when a mutual friend arranged a date. At first, Marilyn didn't even want to go. She thought a baseball player would be just another arrogant celebrity. But Joe surprised her. He was quiet, gentle, and deeply protective. Unlike the Hollywood men she'd dated before, Joe didn't care about the glitz. He wanted Norma Jeane, not the movie star. That sincerity touched Marilyn, and soon they became inseparable. The media loved them. Headlines declared them America's sweethearts. And when they married in January 1954 in San Francisco, fans lined the streets, cheering as if it were a royal wedding. For a brief moment, Marilyn thought she had found what she'd always craved: stability, love, and a safe place to call home. But their differences soon emerged. Joe, a traditional man, wanted Marilyn to give up her career and settle down as his wife. Marilyn, on the other hand, had just renegotiated her contract with Fox and was determined to prove herself as a serious actress. She loved Joe, but she refused to give up her ambitions. The breaking point came during the filming of The 7-Year Itch in 1954. Marilyn stood over a New York subway grate as the wind from below lifted her iconic white dress, a scene that would become one of the most famous moments in film history. Crowds of men cheered, cameras flashed, and the world gawked. But Joe DiMaggio wasn't cheering. He was furious, humiliated by what he saw as his wife being ogled by strangers. Their argument that night turned explosive, and within months their marriage crumbled. After only 9 months together, Marilyn filed for divorce, citing mental cruelty. Yet here's the twist. Joe never stopped loving her. After their divorce, he stayed in touch, checking on her during her darkest times. When she was hospitalized, he sent flowers. When she felt isolated, he called. Friends recall that Joe remained the one man in her life who never betrayed her, never exploited her, and never abandoned her completely. The most poignant chapter of their story came after Marilyn's death in 1962. Joe arranged for roses to be delivered to her grave 3 times a week for 20 years. He never remarried, and when asked late in life about his greatest regret, he said simply, "I'll never forgive myself for not making Marilyn happy." It's the kind of love story Americans hold on to because it mixes romance with tragedy, devotion with loss. For Marilyn, Joe represented the ordinary life she always longed for but could never truly have. And for Joe, Marilyn was the love of his life, the one that got away but never left his heart. Their story reminds us that even legends crave something as simple as love, and that sometimes the brightest stars burn out not because they lacked passion, but because the world around them never let them live quietly. Chapter 6. She had a tumultuous marriage with Arthur Miller. If Joe DiMaggio was the all-American sports hero, Arthur Miller was the intellectual giant. The Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright, known for Death of a Salesman and The Crucible, seemed like the complete opposite of Marilyn Monroe. Where she was Hollywood glitz, he was literary depth. Where she thrived in the chaos of film sets and flashing cameras, he lived quietly in the world of books and ideas. And yet, the two fell into a romance that fascinated America. They met in the early 1950s, but their relationship blossomed after her divorce from DiMaggio. Marilyn was attracted to Miller's intelligence, seeing in him a seriousness that she believed could anchor her life. She once wrote in her diary that she had finally met a man who understood her mind as well as her body, something she'd long craved. In 1956, they married in a quiet ceremony, and for a while, Marilyn believed she'd found the stability she had always searched for. But as with DiMaggio, the marriage was complicated by her fame, her insecurities, and her fragile health. Living under the constant gaze of the press strained their bond. Miller, who was already under scrutiny during the McCarthy era for alleged communist ties, now had a superstar wife whose every move made headlines. At first, Miller defended her, admiring her courage to break free from Hollywood stereotypes. He even wrote The Misfits for her, a film that showcased her depth as an actress. But as Marilyn's struggles with anxiety and addiction worsened, Miller grew frustrated. Her delays on set, her dependency on pills, and her spiraling self-doubt weighed heavily on him. The most devastating blow came when Marilyn discovered that Miller had written in his journal that he sometimes felt disappointed in her, even embarrassed by her. When she found those words, it shattered her. For someone who had long battled feelings of inadequacy, Miller's private thoughts confirmed her worst fears, that even the man she loved most thought she wasn't enough. Their marriage ended in 1961, 5 years after it began, during the filming of The Misfits. The movie itself mirrored their relationship, haunting, complex, and ultimately tragic. Marilyn delivered one of her most raw performances, but behind the camera, she was falling apart, both physically and emotionally. The marriage that began as an intellectual love story ended in disillusionment, leaving Marilyn more isolated than ever. What is striking about her marriage to Arthur Miller is how it highlights Marilyn's longing for validation. She wanted the world to see her as intelligent, capable, and serious. Marrying Miller was, in part, her way of stepping into that world of intellect, but in the end, even that world let her down. And so, Marilyn continued her search for belonging, never quite finding the home she so desperately wanted. 5. Her iconic image was carefully constructed. When you picture Marilyn Monroe, what comes to mind? The platinum blonde curls, the red lips, the white dress billowing over a subway grate. That image wasn't an accident. It was a carefully crafted persona, built to captivate audiences, and it worked so well that it still defines beauty and glamour decades later. But here's the truth. Marilyn didn't look like that naturally. As Norma Jeane, she was a brunette with curly hair and a shy smile. Early in her career, studio executives suggested she lighten her hair to stand out. When she dyed it blonde, her career took off. The new look transformed her from a sweet girl next door into the ultimate symbol of Hollywood allure. Yet the construction of Marilyn's image went beyond hair dye. She studied the way she moved, the way she spoke, even the way she posed for cameras. Friends said she would practice in front of mirrors for hours, perfecting expressions that looked effortless on film. She invented her famously breathy voice by slowing her speech and softening her tone, creating an aura of sensual vulnerability that audiences found irresistible. Costume designers, makeup artists, and photographers all played a part in shaping her brand. They accentuated her curves with figure-hugging dresses, added a beauty mark to her cheek, and photographed her under lighting that made her glow. Every detail was calculated, and Marilyn herself was an active participant in this creation. She knew the power of image and she leaned into it. But the most fascinating part is how she could switch the image on and off. Friends recall walking with her in public where nobody recognized her until she decided to be Marilyn. She would adjust her posture, tilt her chin, and suddenly the crowd would swarm her. It was like flipping a switch. She once joked that Marilyn Monroe was someone she could pull out of her pocket when she needed her, but that otherwise, she was just Norma Jeane. This duality, the constructed star versus the private woman, was both her strength and her curse. On one hand, the image made her unforgettable. She became the ultimate American fantasy, embodying beauty, sex appeal, and charm. On the other hand, it trapped her. People wanted Marilyn, not Norma Jeane. And the more they adored the image, the more isolated she felt inside. Think about how this plays out today. Modern celebrities like Lady Gaga or Beyoncé have crafted larger-than-life personas that are part performance, part reality. But Marilyn was doing it in the 1950s, long before social media, long before branding was a buzzword. She understood instinctively that fame wasn't just about talent, it was about myth-making. And she became her own greatest myth. Her iconic image didn't just sell tickets, it redefined cultural beauty standards. Women copied her hairstyle, her makeup, even the way she stood. Men idolized her, plastering posters of her in dorm rooms, garages, and bars across America. She wasn't just an actress, she was a cultural phenomenon. Yet, at the heart of that image was a very human irony. The more she perfected Marilyn Monroe, the further she drifted from Norma Jeane. And while the world adored the star, the woman inside often felt unseen. 4. She was far smarter than people gave her credit. For the irony of Marilyn Monroe's career is that she played Daz the dumb blonde, so convincingly that people forgot she was acting. Hollywood pigeonholed her into roles that emphasized her looks rather than her intelligence, but behind the glamorous facade was a woman with sharp curiosity, a love for reading, and a determination to grow intellectually. She had a personal library of more than 400 books, ranging from classic literature to philosophy, poetry, and politics. Authors like James Joyce, Walt Whitman, and Leo Tolstoy filled her shelves. She devoured works by Freud and studied art history. She wasn't doing it for show. Marilyn read constantly, carrying books with her even on set. Photographs exist of her reading Ulysses, a novel that many academics consider notoriously difficult, yet she tackled it with genuine interest. Her friends often described her as deeply introspective, someone who asked probing questions and loved discussing ideas. But because the industry and the press fixated on her beauty, her intellect was dismissed. This bothered her. She once said, "I want to be an artist, not an ornament." For Marilyn, acting wasn't just about looking good on screen, it was about expression, truth, and craft. That's why she went to study at the Actors Studio in New York, immersing herself in method acting. It wasn't an easy path. Critics mocked her for trying to reinvent herself as serious. But she persisted, showing a hunger to improve and refusing to be confined to Hollywood stereotypes. Her performance in Bus Stop silenced many doubters, earning critical acclaim and proving she could embody layered, emotionally complex characters. What makes this fact so compelling is how Marilyn's intelligence has often been erased from her story. The myth of the blonde bombshell overshadowed the reality of a woman who cared deeply about her craft, about knowledge, and about the world around her. Think about how often this happens even today. Women, especially those in the public eye, are judged first for their appearance and their intellect is treated as secondary. Marilyn lived that reality in an era when sexism was even more blatant. Yet she refused to surrender to it. She carved out time to nurture her mind, not just her career. In truth, Marilyn Monroe wasn't playing herself when she played the dumb blonde. She was performing a role that Hollywood demanded, and she performed it so well that people believed it was real. That's not stupidity, that's brilliance. 3. She had close ties to American politics and the famous birthday song. Few moments in American pop culture history are as unforgettable as Marilyn Monroe singing Happy Birthday to President John F. Kennedy at Madison Square Garden on May 19, 1962. Dressed in a skin-tight, sparkling dress that looked like it was sewn onto her body, she walked on stage and purred the words, "Happy Birthday, Mr. President," in a way that instantly became iconic. The performance lasted less than a minute, but it cemented her image as both scandalous and irresistible. But what's often forgotten is the broader context of Marilyn's ties to American politics. The Kennedy connection wasn't just about that song. Rumors swirled that she was romantically linked to both President John F. Kennedy and his brother, Attorney General Robert Kennedy. While the full truth has never been confirmed, the whispers alone fueled decades of speculation and conspiracy theories about her death later that same year. Beyond the gossip, Marilyn was genuinely interested in politics. She was friends with progressive thinkers, attended rallies, and supported causes that mattered to her. She once paid the bail for civil rights activist Ella Baker and was known to support the work of writers and artists who had been blacklisted during the McCarthy era. Her marriage to Arthur Miller also exposed her to political circles, as Miller himself had been questioned by the House Un-American Activities Committee. The Happy Birthday performance remains the centerpiece of this chapter in her life. Over 15,000 people attended the event, including politicians, celebrities, and media moguls. When Marilyn took the stage, the room fell silent. The way she sang wasn't just playful. It was electric, almost provocative. The press described it as a scandal in silk. Jackie Kennedy, the First Lady, wasn't present, which only added to the rumors. For Marilyn, the performance was risky. She was already under scrutiny for her erratic behavior on film sets and her personal struggles. Appearing at such a high-profile political event, and in such a suggestive way, only intensified the spotlight on her. But Marilyn knew how to command attention, and that night she reminded the world that she could still shock, still mesmerize, still control a room with a single breathy note. In hindsight, the event feels almost symbolic. Within months, Marilyn Monroe would be dead, and her connections to the Kennedys would fuel endless speculation. Was it coincidence, conspiracy, or just tragedy? No one can say for certain. But what is undeniable is that Marilyn Monroe's presence at the intersection of Hollywood and Washington made her not just an actress but a figure woven into the very fabric of American history. Think about this. How many movie stars today could walk into a political arena and eclipse the president himself? That's what Marilyn did that night. She blurred the lines between entertainment and politics, between myth and reality. And in doing so, she left us with one of the most haunting, unforgettable images of the 20th century. Her death remains one of Hollywood's greatest mysteries. On August 5, 1962, Marilyn Monroe was found dead in her Los Angeles home at just 36 years old. Officially, the cause was listed as probable suicide from a barbiturate overdose. But from the moment the news broke, the world refused to accept the simplicity of that explanation. How could the most famous woman in the world, someone so radiant, so adored, die alone in her bedroom, surrounded by pill bottles? Theories exploded. Some believed it was an accidental overdose, the result of her long struggle with prescription medications. Others whispered about conspiracies involving the Kennedys, suggesting that Marilyn knew too much about political secrets and had to be silenced. Still others pointed fingers at the mafia or Hollywood elites who wanted her gone. What makes her death so haunting is the number of unanswered questions. Why were there inconsistencies in the autopsy report? Why did neighbors recall seeing suspicious activity the night she died? Why did investigators note that her phone records seemed to have been tampered with? Each detail fed the fire of speculation. Even today, more than 60 years later, Marilyn's death remains one of Hollywood's most enduring mysteries. Documentaries, books, and podcasts continue to revisit the case, each one trying to separate fact from rumor. But perhaps the truth will never be fully known. What we do know is that her passing shocked the world. Fans gathered outside her home, weeping openly. Newspapers around the globe ran headlines declaring the loss of a legend. Joe DiMaggio, the man who had once been her husband and perhaps her truest love, arranged her funeral. In a heartbreaking gesture, he banned Hollywood executives from attending, blaming them for exploiting her. For the next 20 years, he had roses delivered to her grave 3 times a week. Marilyn's death froze her in time. She never aged, never faded, never had the chance to reinvent herself again. She became eternal, forever the radiant 36-year-old with the platinum curls and luminous smile, and perhaps that's part of why her myth endures. She left before the world could ever watch her decline. But the tragedy is also a reminder of how unforgiving fame can be. Marilyn Monroe had everything the world thought mattered: beauty, wealth, fame, influence, and yet she longed for stability, love, and peace. In the end, she remained the foster child searching for home, even as millions adored her. Number 1. Her legacy transcends time. More than 6 decades after her death, Marilyn Monroe remains one of the most recognizable figures on Earth. Walk into any college dorm, barbershop, or pop culture store, and chances are you'll find her face on posters, coffee mugs, or T-shirts. Andy Warhol immortalized her in his famous pop art series, turning her image into a symbol of modern art. Musicians still reference her in lyrics. Fashion houses continue to channel her style on runways. She is, in every sense, timeless. But why does her legacy endure when so many other stars of her era have faded? It's because Marilyn was more than an actress. She was an idea. She represented beauty, vulnerability, rebellion, and tragedy all at once. She embodied the contradictions of the American dream, adored by millions but desperately lonely, powerful yet fragile, iconic yet painfully human. Her films continue to be celebrated. Some Like It Hot is consistently ranked as one of the greatest comedies ever made. Gentlemen Prefer Blondes gave us the unforgettable number Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend, a performance that Madonna, Beyoncé, and countless others have reimagined. Her influence extends far beyond cinema. It lives in music videos, fashion shoots, advertising, and even in the way modern celebrities craft their public images. But her legacy isn't just about style or movies. It's also about resilience. Marilyn started as Norma Jeane, a foster child with no connections, and transformed herself into one of the most famous women in history. She proved that reinvention is possible, that a person can rise from nothing and become unforgettable. That story continues to inspire dreamers everywhere, especially in America, where her journey feels like the ultimate from rags to riches tale. Even in the age of social media, when fame burns fast and fades quickly, Marilyn Monroe's star hasn't dimmed. In fact, it may shine brighter now than ever. Young people who weren't even alive when she was on screen still know her name, still recognize her image, still understand her aura. She belongs to every generation because her story touches on something universal: the desire to be loved, to be seen, to matter. Her legacy also serves as a cautionary tale. Marilyn reminds us of the cost of fame, of how the world can adore someone while simultaneously destroying them. She reminds us to look beyond the image and see the person, with all their complexities, struggles, and humanity. In the end, Marilyn Monroe wasn't just Hollywood's brightest star. She became a cultural mirror, reflecting our obsessions, our dreams, and our contradictions. And that is why, more than 60 years later, we are still talking about her, still fascinated, still in awe. Marilyn Monroe's life was a paradox. She was Norma Jeane and Marilyn, vulnerable and powerful, adored and lonely, brilliant and underestimated. She transformed herself into an icon but longed for the simple comforts of love and stability. She broke barriers in Hollywood, reinvented her career, and dared to demand respect in a world that wanted to reduce her to an image. And in death, she became eternal. The 10 facts we've explored: her name changed her fight for control in Hollywood, her struggles with mental health, her marriages to Joe DiMaggio and Arthur Miller, her carefully constructed image, her hidden intelligence, her ties to politics, her mysterious death, and her timeless legacy paint a picture of a woman who was far more than the dumb blonde the world thought it knew. She was complex, flawed, brilliant, and unforgettable. Marilyn Monroe wasn't just a star. She was and remains a phenomenon. If you like this video, don't forget to hit that like button and share it with your friends so more people can discover the incredible story of Marilyn Monroe. Subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the lives of the world's most fascinating icons, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an upload. And let us know in the comments. Which fact about Marilyn surprised you the most? We'd love to hear your thoughts.